All right, no, we're gonna go back. which, actually our county's in pretty good state compliance all the time, but
a magistrate with Akron Municipal
I don't think
Court
they are
for a
still.
little over 3 years. So, how about you?
I've been
Yes. It was so underfunded.
Okay.
There was
You guys do good
one
work
lady
over
was
there.
out. They were both like on medical leave or something. They're
Yes,
only
there's
like
a lot to be done
assessors,
over there. Yeah,
And I've had a hard time like
absolutely.
staying up.
Yep.
Well, yeah, because for me, because they've approached us because we're both we're required to do assessor and contractor, but it's a wrap. No one wants to touch it. No one wants to go there and even help because it's such a
They
wrap.
really don't. They
I mean,
just really don't.
I call my friends and they're like, oh my gosh. They're doing dual work. I mean, from
try.
what I'm able to tell, they have the grant piece and then the public health piece. And I'm like, why are you guys doing
A little bit, yes. Yes, we did. Yes,
double
we
your
did.
work? It should be all held under. I mean, there's just a lot of tiny tweaks that they work to do.
So one of the things that Mayor Bibb did was put in place
I
somebody
believe
whose role
that
in
there was the questions you guys had for each of us, and then they were going to open it up a little bit. Yeah,
really
I
focused
believe that was
only
the
on
format.
I think they're calling her the lead czar. So funny. I know, right?
Probably safer.
So
If you don't know
I
what those
really
questions
have
are going
a
to
lot
be.
of.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it's good because
Yes.
It's the right direction.
it's the right direction.
And I'm telling you,
Specials, our special
the response was,
attendees
it's
that
too
are
complex. It's too complicated.
going to hit us
from
with something that we just
that.
can't even
Their
answer.
main
Yeah.
and like we even talked about. So how long have you it's not too complex.
It's not,
You can
no.
actually figure it out.
So I've been
It's fairly-
city council since
I mean,
January
right? It's
2020.
fairly straightforward. I mean, what the state requires is not.
I started, and then the world.
I mean, there's like steps.
I started on council.
laid out.
They should. I should call. She should call us because we have flow charted everything. Like dummied it down to say, okay, you're at this step. Here's your next. I mean, it's based totally on what the state requires because that's the hard. It's hard to keep in compliance with the state, but I mean, our flow charts are. We had
That's
one guy
one of the
worked
odd
6 months on
benefits
flow
of
charting
the
things
pandemic.
for staff.
It's allowed
Is there sort of
progress
any
in areas because
Yeah.
it
I mean, that, like,
amplified
that
some
might be a
of
resource
the
that
big
So
that everyone
so here's the thing,
because it
and
just
it's not
didn't
very well
affect
publicized, but
And now it's affecting everyone.
we're called public PHLIs, public health lead investigators, okay? And that's anyone.
Oh, I know that sounded family.
They
didn't
have
it?
a meeting every year. We're required to go to this meeting where they roll
Yes,
out
you can
all this stuff.
please take it.
They never
Less
push
I
it
have to
out
say, the better.
to- We also are required to do what's called refresher classes. And I finally said, this stuff needs to be out to everybody, not just these.
Yes,
not
this was
just
my
20 of us
neurotic. I
here.
need to have
I mean,
notes
these are,
before I walk in here.
So I push. I
Panicky.
suggest to Pam Blaze. She's the kind of the in charge of. How do we push these out so
They
everyone
talked
understands
yesterday
these
about,
rules?
well, you weren't on that call.
and
They were talking about.
They're not a very good push out. My
can't
friend
remember
works
what
there.
it's
They
called.
took the state, but they're like,
hopefully
when
there
she
can
writes
be
a
some
LIRA, a
mediation.
lead risk assessment,
Housing program.
it goes to like 6 people
So that sounds
to
fantastic.
check for typos.
I'm not sure.
Do you ever
how
see?
it works
Do you ever see
here,
the
and I
report
haven't
they
done
send?
Well,
Like we're sending this.
This will be
to
part
non-
of
I mean,
the
I just
whole
get on my
panel discussion.
soapbox. I'm like,
I'm
we're
actually
sending
the
this to
supervisor for
non-
the mediation department at Akron.
because the state says you have
And
to. I'm
one
like,
of the
"You don't
things that
understand this."
we
I really understand.
implemented
It's
last
really hard
year,
to, like,
it actually went in
figure out what you're at.
the late summer, early fall of
Exactly.
2021.
Exactly. They
We
need
got picked
what's
by
the right? They need one
a pilot
page
program
or 2 pages.
and start
There's
eviction.
so we have dummied it down.
It's called online dispute
That's
resolution.
it.
That's it.
We
Here's the
require
secret though.
every
Do you know that if it's
filing
not
in
deteriorated, so if you
our
go
court
and there's
to go through or at least attempt by
a
registering
baluster that's intact
online
that tests
dispute
positive
resolution.
for lead,
Now
that does not go on your order. So you are identifying all the lead, but you are not.
the filing.
You're not
Yes,
letting the owner
filing's already
know.
there.
So I
All right, good morning. Good morning again. I hate to interrupt the good conversation. I think that's one of the great things to have us all here today, but we've got a great and vibrant panel, and I want to get started. My name's John Pettit. I'm a managing attorney at Community Legal Aid, and I will be moderating this panel, and we're happy to talk about the rule of law. And so to start us off, I think the easiest would be to go down the list and have each of our panelists kind of introduce themselves and talk about what they do and why they agreed to serve on this panel. So starting out here, we can start with Kelly. Yeah,
Okay.
sure. Yeah, yes.
My name is Kelly Barr. I am the CFO of East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation. I'm in my 19th year there, and we have a lot of housing, and we really want to promote homeownership and provide really good quality housing for people to live in. It's a huge deal for children to have a home that is stable and not having critters from outside crawling around or falling down around them. So it's very important to us, and I was first told I had to do the panel by my boss, who's in the next room. But once I embraced it, the panel, what they're doing is great. We need to get more word out about how we can work together because eviction isn't good for anybody, including landlords.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. Magistrate Angela Hardway.
Good morning. My name is Magistrate Angela Hardway. I've been with the Akron Municipal Court for a little over 3 years now. I am one of the 2 court-wide magistrates. I cover evictions and small claims. I also take part in traffic. I also assist all of the judges at our court. I happen to also be the mediation supervisor for our court and have been part of the implementation of the ODR project through the Supreme Court that has provided opportunity to landlords and tenants to try and negotiate out their issues before they have to come in front of one of us magistrates to end up with an eviction or not. The reason I am on this panel is, I'm one of the several magistrates in my court that are on the front line and see the challenges and the issues that come along with filing an eviction and what the consequences of that are. So I felt very strongly. I've taken part in the eviction task force that Councilman Malik is part of, and with the eviction rates in our area, we feel, the Akron Municipal Court as a whole feels very strongly that if we can find ways to lower those numbers and keep people in their homes and keep landlords getting paid, that we have done a service to our community.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shamus Malik with Akron City Council. I've been serving on council since January 2020, so I started and just a couple months later the world ended. But thankfully we're all back together here today. See a lot of familiar faces and friendly faces. Before that, I was an attorney with the city of Akron and worked on a lot of different things. But since being on council, I've tried to work a lot on housing issues along with a lot of my colleagues. Councilman Jeff Fusco is right here. And we on council have been trying to respond to housing issues, particularly during the pandemic, because we've seen what a burden, we already had such a high level of evictions, and it's become such an even greater burden during COVID. And have also participated in the eviction task force. And so, when asked, I will come. I agree that with what Kelly said, it's just so important that we raise awareness, have these discussions today, and then go out into the community and make sure that others understand the challenges and the sense of urgency that we all need around solutions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Abigail Stout. I'm a managing attorney at the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. I've been working there since 2006 and have primarily done housing work. And when I say housing, I mean landlord-tenant work. And when I say landlord-tenant work, I mean advocacy for tenants. So since I was a baby lawyer, I sort of recognized and saw as my time in housing law continued how impactful it was to have a lawyer by your side when you're being evicted. And I also saw how very few people were afforded an attorney by their side when they were evicted. And the outcomes were so radically different. And so being here in 2022 and knowing all of these great different tenant protections that benefit really everybody in our community, it's just astounding, and that's really largely why I'm here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sue Cummings, and I work for the Summit County Public Health Department. I am a healthy home specialist and a lead risk assessor, lead risk contractor, and I have worked in housing for 15 years. It's my passion. I deal with people every day facing eviction, and they're scared. They're afraid to complain. They don't want to leave names. So, we do everything we can to help them out. And fair housing, I've worked with fair housing for many, many years. I think they might have me on speed dial, and which is fine. So, I'm a passionate advocate for tenants.
Well, great. Well, thank you all for coming and joining the panel. This should be great. I have a number of questions that I'm going to lay out to the panelists and let them respond as they find appropriate. But also at the end, we're going to reserve a fair amount of time, hopefully, for Q&A, because we want to hear from you. And I've got Josh in the back that'll be going around with a microphone. And so we would ask that you save your questions until the end, but we anticipate having plenty of time for that. So I think to start out, maybe to sort of set the field, maybe the first question is, for those who have never gone through the eviction process, can you kind of walk us through that, the stages, the steps, and how quick that goes? And maybe Magistrate Hardaway, if you don't mind starting us off.
Thank you. I'm actually going to start a little bit before the filing of a complaint in my court, because there is a number of things that happen to a tenant by a landlord prior to that filing. There is going to be a notice that has been, if it's done properly, a notice that's been provided to the tenant if they are going to be evicted. At that time, it is giving that tenant an opportunity to rectify the situation, discuss it with their landlord if possible, and try to stay in their home based on what that notice is. Once that time has passed, the landlord can then file a complaint for eviction and possibly money damages with the court. At that time, they've now filed a legal action against the tenant to reclaim their property, and possibly for the damages, could be non-payment of rent, it could be damages to the property, that they're going to come to a hearing on. That hearing in our court is going to be scheduled anywhere from within 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the court schedule. So it moves very fast. The Ohio Revised Code allows for it to be what they call an expedited hearing. So it's not a long process, like maybe if you've gotten sued for a car accident, that could take years. This is not going to take years. This is going to be done in probably under two months. When that happens in our court, because of a pilot program from the Supreme Court of Ohio, we order mandatory online dispute resolution or mediation. That has been an administrative order that has been in place by our administrative judge since mid-2021. That is one of the last line opportunities to get the landlord and the tenant to speak and try to avoid going to the court hearing and ultimately ending up with some kind of decision on the record for either party. If that does not resolve, you're going to then come to our court. You're going to have a hearing that is going to only deal with the facts of the complaint that the landlord has filed. For example, if it's non-payment of rent, we're only going to discuss non-payment of rent because that is what is on that complaint. If it's termination of your tenancy, which means they've decided they just don't want you to live there any longer, we're going to discuss that. At the conclusion of that hearing, a decision is going to be made that a judge will ultimately sign off on. And if it is against the tenant, a writ is going to be issued. That writ is the notice that the landlord can purchase from our court to have the property tagged, giving the tenant a date that they have to move by. If that tenant does not move by that date, and that date, let me back up, that writ can be purchased anytime within 60 days of the granting of it from our court. If that writ is purchased and that property is tagged for what is called the eviction, that will happen within 7 to 10 days. If that tenant is not out of the property by that time, the landlord will be permitted with a bailiff and the sheriff to come and remove all of the property to the curb. At that point, we are out of it. Once that writ is issued, we're out of it unless there's what we call a second cause. That would be a separate issue as to the money damages for unpaid rent and damages to the property. That would be a hearing at a different time.
Great, thank you. Just a follow-up on that, maybe, Abigail, if you don't mind, can you tell us how that process differs for those tenants with an attorney versus those without? I realize the legal process is the same, but in reality, often it's very different.
That's right. I'd be happy to talk about that. For a tenant who is not represented, the experience is so different than a tenant who's been represented. So that is where we start from. We asked Case Western Reserve University to do a study on what are the long-term impacts of eviction. And this was pre-pandemic, but I think probably the results are very similar to post-pandemic. And so starting from sort of what are the long-term impacts on a tenant who is evicted, and then turning to what the courtroom experience is like, what we see with those who have been evicted, and there's many studies out there, and this is just what our this study in particular focused on in Cleveland, that there is really, they took away 5 major impacts. One is that those who are evicted tend to be more mobile. So if you've been evicted, you're less likely to stay for a long time in another unit in the future. You're more likely to move more often. That lends itself to instability. We see that in our schools and all kinds of other places. Second is that there's a high likelihood that when you've been evicted, you often end up moving to a less resourced neighborhood. And so there's fewer resources, the housing is in less quality shape. Third, if a family ends up heading to a shelter for some period of time, if there's an eviction, they end up staying in the shelter for a longer period of time than those who don't have an eviction on their record. Fourth, we see that there's higher absentee levels for those children who have been in homes that have been where there's been an eviction. This is especially impactful for kids who are in high school. The numbers are really different for those who've been through an eviction, especially for those who just never returned to school. And then the fifth long-term impact that we see is that for those families that have been evicted, they are less likely to have their children tested for lead, and when they are tested for lead, those test results come back for a higher level of lead in blood for more of those kids. And I think this is all sort of, if you think about what is happening for those families, you can understand why that's happening. So for a family who's being evicted, what we see is in Cleveland, it happens very, very quickly. The court process itself can be anywhere from 2 to 6 minutes, and that eviction has been granted. And now those evictions are taking place on Zoom, and so we don't have the data, but my thought is it probably happens a little quicker. And those families have to move usually within 10 days. They don't have a time. They are held, if they are unrepresented, to the same level of understanding the law as somebody who is represented. That magistrates will give maybe a little bit of extra help, but they are held to the same level as though they are lawyers, and which you can imagine is completely unfair. And so many people don't even actually go to their hearing. What they end up doing is just moving out or accepting that eviction on their record and moving out. We see that over 50% of tenants don't come to their hearing. The difference that we have seen in Cleveland, we passed a right to counsel in 2019. It was implemented in 2020. We've gone from 1% of tenants who are represented in court to 20%. The ordinance that we passed is only applicable to those who are at or below 100% of the poverty guidelines and who have at least one child in the household. And so for those folks, we're seeing really, really different outcomes. Most of them are able to move if they want to and have more time to move. Most of them are hooked up with rent assistance. Most of them are able to achieve the outcome that they're hoping for. So we've had really, really, really great results from that program. No.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add about the process?
I think just to add on the point that Abby was making about when someone has to go into a court and kind of defend whether they can stay in their home, but they aren't a lawyer, they don't know the magic words that you're supposed to use. It's a process that lacks like dignity and respect for that person, right? And so that's why this right to counsel program is so important, because it recognizes that, you know, this is a fundamental part of the process, is having a lawyer. That's why 90% of housing providers have a lawyer in this process. And we want to make sure that tenants do too, and that it also helps with communication. Often evictions happen because there's been a breakdown in communication between these two parties. And lawyers talking to lawyers can help perhaps smooth that over or engage in the mediation program a little bit better.
Thank you. So what does the eviction mean for both parties? We've talked a lot about what it means for the tenants, but how about the landlords? And maybe the other panelists too can talk about the immediate and long-term effects. But Kelly, from the landlord's perspective?
Sure. Again, I just want to say that we don't want to evict people. That's not what we got into the business of doing. It is a tool that we have to use sometimes that is required. We don't want to do it. However, having said that, I appreciate what you said about the getting before you file the 3-day notice, or I'm sorry, the eviction process. Communicate with your landlord. There are so many things that can happen beforehand that can stop an eviction, because the eviction will follow you forever. And while that does affect the tenant, it also affects the landlords, because many landlords say, I can't rent to people who have evictions on their records, right? And so now we're put in a position where we can't, based on policies. So it's so much, it affects us. It lowers our pool to choose from. It's costly for us. We go through the process of the eviction. While 2 months may seem like a very quick process for the tenant side, for the landlord side, that's money we're not getting in, and I do have a mortgage to pay every month. So it's costly, and then we have to turn the unit. Okay, so that's costly. We don't want that. We don't want to do that. It's so much better if you can come on the front end and say, hey, I can't make my rent this month, and we can work with you on it. We have payment agreements. We have started working more with legal aid with our tenants. In fact, in our Canton office, they're right next to us, and we've reached out to them a couple times to meet with our tenants at the same time before we start that process, so the tenant can understand what their options are. And then on top of that, I just lost my train of thought because I was so busy thinking about that. I'm so sorry about that. But the communication, the CARES Act, we were able to advocate for our tenants with their initiation, and through this system, we've got a lot of units, right? We have over 700 units. But for the last 2 years, we have been able to assist them with getting over $290,000 worth of rental assistance. That's a whole lot of money. That's a whole lot of people that didn't have to be displaced because they talked to us beforehand, and we worked together as a team to keep them in there. So the long-term effects is financial, usually on the landlord side, but we don't want to see it. So let's work together on that.
Great, thank you. Sue, how about impact health-wise?
So it's interesting because what typically happens is people will call us 3 days before they're being evicted, and then they'll have a laundry list, and they'll always say, you have to get out here and tomorrow because I'm getting evicted, and I have now all these complaints. So it doesn't always work that way. We're busy. We do our best, but I wish tenants would call us prior so we could actually help them so they don't have to live in some dire circumstances. And I've also noticed recently a big uptick of anonymous complaints. So, and I don't know if this is a newer generation thing and they just don't want to deal with people, but they want to call about, excessive mold in their house or on their ceilings caving in, but they don't want to give me a unit number. We can't do anything with that. Nor can we call them and say, you have to provide us some way of talking to you to see the problem, to document the problem. If there's a problem, we will write the order to the landlord. And another thing we get all the time is about mold calls. So there are no standards for mold. So when people call about mold, mold is an allergen. What we say to them is, while you might have mold, mold needs, 3 things, and you have to have a water source somewhere. Where is this water? Is something leaking? No. And usually when I go out, it's just a mildew around a window or a bathroom. So there's a lot of tenant education, but these tenants feel very marginalized. And here now another bureaucrat is saying, I'm sorry, there's not a lot I can do. So I'm very sympathetic I'm like, okay, well, I'm very sympathetic. They feel helpless. And that just is terrible. And some live in terrible conditions. But these landlords do the bare minimum repairs enough for us to. I have an apartment complex they have about 10 different buildings, and about 5 roofs every year collapse in on people. Now, I go out, they fix it, I abate it, and I just wait for the next one to fall in. That's not right, and it's subsidized housing. That is not right. But I don't know. I mean, I've tried everything. It's a HUD-owned property. I've tried everything. I've called God and everybody to say, we are putting people with children and ceilings collapsing, and this is okay. It's not okay. So I beat the drum as best as I can, and I call because I'm the squeaky wheel because it's not right. But if the landlord does the basic minor repairs, I am required to abate the order. So I understand why people are frustrated and unhappy.
Thank you. Others? Sure. Shamus?
Well, I guess I want to say to that point, that's one of the things that we've seen from the city is that we only have a handful of housing inspectors for the whole city. And these are folks who are, really dedicated to their work and are trying their best with a difficult system. But we're not able to be as proactive as we'd like to be. And so I'm sure you've seen some of the stories in the paper about conditions where, you walk into a home and the apartment's being heated by an oven, and the kids are sitting just a couple feet away on a couch, right? And you press down on a floor that was recently renovated, and water comes up out of the floor, right? And these are conditions that no one should be living in 2022, let alone in our city. And so one of the things we were able to do this year is add budget for additional housing inspectors, 3 additional housing inspectors. So hopefully we can be more proactive. But we also need to look at our housing code to figure out, do we want to have a situation where, an order is made and then if a repair is made within 30 days, there's no fine? Well, maybe there should be a fine on the front end if it's an issue if it's the same issue with a roof that keeps falling in and in and in. It's not actually being resolved, but we don't have enough of a stick in our housing code. So that's another thing we need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
And the quality of repairs.
Absolutely.
They have their Uncle Joe come, and it's going to fail in 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, call me back. I often think there should be a nuisance fine for properties that use, that we find issues at every single year. Every year I've been here.
Yep.
It's aggravating.
And no offense to anyone's Uncle Joe.
Yeah, no. yeah. Politician. Not.
Well, I'm glad you brought up about the conditions issues, because even though this is an eviction summit, certainly housing conditions that don't get addressed have an impact, right? There's a correlation with evictions. It is interesting. I know that in preparation for this, we ran some statistics, and we were talking about remedies for landlords and landlords having attorneys, and their remedy is to file evictions. In Akron Municipal Court, since January of 2020 through, it looks like this is about an 18-month snapshot through June of 2021, of the 2,700 eviction cases filed, 80% of those, 81%, had a landlord that was represented by an attorney. So, that's consistent kind of with what we heard, 80 to 90%. 11% of the tenants had an attorney, and so you see that vast discrepancy there. So my question leading up to that is, there is a legal pathway for landlords to go through the eviction process. What legal pathway exists for tenants to address their need? Sue?
Can I just say, because I didn't realize this years ago going into this, but we always advise tenants to escrow their rent. Mm-hmm. And so I was educated that when they do, because, a lot of my people will not follow through those steps, but I've had 4 or 5. Well, it turns out that at the end, they live in these conditions that aren't being controlled. Their rent's being escrowed. At the end, when they leave, the money goes to the landlord anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm like, so you live in these conditions, you pay your rent to the courts, but every penny goes to the landlord to make the repairs?
Yeah.
So what incentive do the tenants have to actually follow through the process? The landlord is going to get the money anyway. So why not? I don't know. It's just I didn't realize they got every penny. Or I think there's ways that you can ask. Maybe that's.
We have had some rare cases where we do get the money back to the tenant, but again, that's usually if the tenant has counsel, and that doesn't
Correct.
happen a whole lot. And I don't have the figures for how many cases get escrowed, of the 9,800 or so that are eviction filings. And my guess is it's probably under 100 that
It is. It is.
Yeah, maybe a dozen, right? So along those lines, so even that escrow process or threatening to escrow is difficult, I think, for tenants, right? Because they can face repercussions, about that. Abby, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, if you think about what Susan said about all of the calls that they're getting where people won't even leave their name because they're afraid of their landlords. Escrowing your rent is like that times 5 billion, because what it means is you first, in order to do it, you have to first notify your landlord. They need to know that there's a repair issue that needs to be made. They get a reasonable amount of time to make it, which is generally 30 days, unless it's of an emergency nature, like no heat in the winter, no supply of water, those sort of big life basic needs. If the landlord does not make the repair in that time, then the tenant can start escrowing their rent. And that hits the landlords in their pockets, and so that usually can create some movement towards repair. And the money, under the the law, the money can go to the landlord specifically to make repairs. It also may go back to the tenant, or the court may order that the tenant have to pay less because the conditions of the unit don't merit that full amount of rent. And the tenant can also terminate the lease based on those conditions issues. But it is so underutilized because so many tenants are afraid of the connection to eviction. And so they would rather stay in those conditions than face the fact of having to move to another place that has equal or the same or worse conditions because of their need to move. And it goes to, our long, our old housing stock, and a long time of not having super strong housing codes that require regular inspections and an ability to sort of hold those landlords accountable. That is not the responsibility of the tenant. That is the responsibility of some other entity.
And I think our landlords, some of them allow people into what I call the trap, where they only can pay their $100 perpetually every month short, or they pay it here. So it gives them immediate grounds to evict because they're never collecting the full rent. I hear that a lot.
Yeah. You do have to be. You have to have paid. You have to be current in your rent in order to even start the escrow process.
And that they don't get receipts for their rent. I mean, there's some basic things as tenants that our renters still need to understand. You get a receipt, keep the receipt, take a picture of the receipt, have proof if you're handing over cash.
Magistrate, do you want to talk about sort of the challenges the court has with unrepresented folks and the escrow process?
Sure. A couple of things that has been mentioned from our experience in Akron. When the pandemic hit, we of course also went to virtual hearings. We were incredibly concerned with the attendance. Pre-pandemic, attendance for tenants was maybe 15%. So that meant that they did not attend, and you got to think of it in the fashion of they've got to get to the court, they've got some of them is transportation, they've got to get child care. There's a lot of factors that got them to where they're being evicted in the first place. Social factors that I can't control. They just don't show up. Post-pandemic, and giving the opportunity for Zoom actually has increased our attendance by tenants to about 50%. We've actually seen an uptick, and we actually see a lot more attendance by tenants to present their own defenses. That gives us tools. If nobody shows up, we get one side of the story. If both people show up, we get both sides of the story, and we can then weigh both sides before we make a decision. Of course, we have to stay fair and impartial. And we're bound by the laws. We have the same laws everyone else has to follow, and we can only decide based on those laws. Legislative changes help us. City Council last year passed the pay to stay and income legislations. That has allowed us, and has allowed tenants a way to, if the tenant can come up with the full amount of money, they don't get the eviction now. The landlord can't refuse it, which happens somewhat regularly. Once that 3 days filed, landlords refuse to take their money, but it has to be all of the money. So keep that in mind, it can't be half. So we've actually seen an increase in attendance, which has allowed more discussion. Additionally, when you're talking about the escrow process, and having an attorney, I believe, is vital. I can't tell you how many times the phone calls, here is legal aid's number. It may as well be on our recording, because we can't answer the legal questions that tenants need to know about escrows. They need someone to tell them whether or not they are properly filing an escrow. We have seen an increase in escrows in the last 2 years go from what would have been maybe 12 or 15 for a year to 12 or 15 in 3 months. It has increased dramatically. We are hearing between 2 and 8 escrow hearings a month at the moment. Okay, that doesn't mean that they're correctly filed. But it does give the court the opportunity to require the individuals to now try to come to some agreement that they both can part ways and the damage isn't done. Okay? It is a tool that allows the court to get individuals out of a lease. One of the things that escrow does not do, and it goes to the point that the landlord gets the money, if the repairs are made, the landlord's entitled to the money that they've had escrowed, that rent. unless there is some showing that it wasn't habitable at the time. We can reduce the rent, and it is an avenue that the court can then terminate the lease agreement so that the tenant doesn't get sued for the remainder portion of the lease. So there's a lot of avenues that the escrow process gives to tenants, but it's got to be a properly filed escrow. If it's for things that are not considered impacting the habitability of the property, that's not escrow issues. That is violations of the lease, and that is a different type of filing. And unfortunately, without legal counsel, the layperson doesn't know that, and we can't educate them for that.
Just to sort of follow up a little bit on what Magistrate Hardway mentioned when she was speaking, she talked about source of income protection and pay to stay. What we have seen in the past couple of years is sort of a real momentum to add certain protections that you might think were just there anyways but haven't been there. So we have to follow the state law, the Ohio state law, and then each ordinance has the opportunity to sort of add certain protections and certain ordinances that impact landlord and tenants. A couple of the trending ordinances in across the state have been, one is pay to stay. Ohio is one of 5 states in the United States that doesn't allow a tenant to rehabilitate their tenancy by paying all of the money that they owe their landlord prior to the eviction. After that 3-day notice is sent or is served, the landlord is entitled, under most circumstances, to proceed with that eviction, even if the tenant has all of the rent. And so many municipalities have responded to that sort of hole in our law by passing ordinances where tenants can pay in order to, and then the landlord must accept that rent and late fees, and if there's been an eviction filed, and the court filing fee. So basically, the idea is if the tenant can make the landlord whole, then the tenant has a right to stay. And with those ordinances, have a couple other tenant protections have been tacked on. One is the receipt issue. So many of those ordinances also include a protection where landlords are required to provide a receipt for rent, for security deposit, for utilities, anything else. And so that's something that we haven't had before. And then there's also been caps on late fees. Landlords can really, there are many leases that really afford a really high amount of late fees, and it just becomes impossible for a tenant to make rent and late fees. So some of these ordinances have a cap at either 5 to 8% of the total rent amount, or up to $25, something like that. And so those are really helpful for tenants. And then the other one is the source of income. This is where a landlord is not able to discriminate against a tenant by where the money that they're paying for their rent is coming from. So oftentimes there's, in rental advertisements, it says no Section 8, for example. This is the most common one. They'll say no Section 8. That landlord is saying they will not take a Section 8 voucher. They will not participate in that program. That means that somebody who can pay full rent and has the access to the, this great subsidy, so they should be able to rent anywhere in that municipality, can't actually rent in 50%, 80% of the places that they want to, because that landlord won't accept Section 8. And this has been proven to be a proxy for race discrimination. So many jurisdictions are passing these source of income laws that say you can't do that. A landlord can't discriminate based on where your rent comes from. If it's Social Security, if it's rent assistance from one of these programs that have been implemented since the beginning of the pandemic, if it's Section 8. So those are just a couple of the emerging laws that are helping tenants and are really exciting to see.
And just to go off of that, it was really important that we pass both of those pieces of legislation last year, particularly because there were situations where landlords were saying, I don't want to accept CARES Act money or rental assistance money. And really it was a pretext. They didn't want that specific tenant there anymore. And so they were using this as a pretext. And but it also goes to Section 8, and this has happened for decades. And so now you can no longer have that no Section 8 in your advertisement in the Beacon Journal. And it really speaks to this idea of a stigma that people who are Section 8 renters are somehow less than other renters. And the reality is that if you have the money to pay, it shouldn't matter the circumstances by which you have that money. What matters is that you're able to do that every month. And so that was really critical. The other piece, pay to stay, kind of comes in on the back end, right? If someone is able to make the landlord completely whole before an eviction is ordered, what is the point in putting them out on the street, especially during a pandemic, right? And so those are two common sense things that we took from Columbus, we took from Toledo. I was really proud. We beat Cleveland to it. Cleveland is considering it now. But there are things Cleveland is way ahead of us on, right? So the Right to Counsel program that Abby mentioned, right? They've been doing this for over a year, and the results that they're seeing are incredible, right? The amount of money that's being saved by social service agencies that don't have to help place people who are homeless, the amount of time that kids who are homeless might not be able to make it to school and now are now able to make it to school, right? And just having a lawyer means that you might be able to negotiate a move out so that you have an extra month to move out, or you have an extra 2 weeks, and you're able to find a place so you don't end up homeless. And the housing is so related to all the other issues we're dealing with, right? If a kid is not sure where they're going to live at the end of the night, or where they're going to put their head at the end of the day, they're much more likely to be involved in things related to trauma like youth violence. They're much more have a much harder time with educational attainment. And so I'm really hoping this is something we can pursue through the ARPA money that we have as a city, as a pilot program. In Cleveland, it's with Legal Aid and United Way. There's a partnership. And so that's something we could do here with our Legal Aid and with our United Way in our city of Akron. So, and then there's, and not to step on your toes, Angela, but all of the work that the judges are doing in the municipal court with this mediation program. And so we can help expand that mediation program as well, right? And make sure they have the resources and they have the staff and the capacity to really bridge those communication gaps. So there's a number of things that we can do. We really just need a greater sense of urgency around doing them.
Just real quickly, I wanted to ask, these are all great things, and luckily, ENDC, we have Section 8 tenants. We take money to make people, because our goal is to have people in there. But once it's filed, it's on their record forever.
Yep.
So if I have a tenant that makes me whole and I want to say, hey, I would like for this to get off their record, is there anything in place like that that we can do to help out?
I'll let Angela speak to it in more in depth, but sealing of records has been a big topic of interest over the last few years. And again, I'll let you speak to the specifics, but it is a really significant challenge, because often it's hard to rent if there's several evictions or even eviction filings that were not ultimately granted on someone's record. That's something I know the court has discussed, so I don't want to step on your toes.
We have. No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm glad I took notes. So in 2019, and it actually went into effect in, I believe, February of 2020, we had proposed in our local rules something called Rule 39. That proposal had tried to create an expungement or a sealing of eviction records. It was very proactive, for the lack of a better way of putting it. There are not a lot of municipalities in the state of Ohio that allows it. What you've seen through the pandemic is suddenly there's been more movement toward allowing for this, because there were so many evictions that were related to just the pandemic that your pool of tenants just changed dramatically. People are penalized because the pandemic affected them, not necessarily the reason that evictions are there for the habitual individuals who don't pay their rent. And when we proposed it, our rules were going to be that there were extenuating circumstances, and there had to be 3 years passed since the judgment was rendered, or that the judgment was satisfied, and that there had been no more evictions on that person's record. And that wasn't just in our municipality, it was all the municipalities. So there was a way for landlords to get monies that were back owed, as well as get the ceilings, so that people were not prohibited from reasonable housing. Unfortunately, at the time, the landlord bar was extremely vocal. There were many concerns among the judiciary across the state that we had to table that. Let's move forward 2 years now. What you're seeing not only is more willingness from both sides to actually see this happen now, which we're happy to hear. You also have Senate Bill 158 through our Ohio legislature. Senate Bill 158 has actually been now announced as a bipartisan bill. So you have both sides agreeing to wanting an eviction expungement or sealing process. That is certainly, it is currently sitting in the Senate. They have not had meetings on it yet, but that bill, very similar to the Akron Municipal Court Ordinance local rule that we had proposed, was a 3-year. There would be 3 years of no evictions or judgments, but it also allows, it's actually a little bit more liberal than our bill was, our local rule was going to be, because it actually indicates that the judiciary can find, due to interest of justice or reasonable predictor of future tenant behavior, if we believe that the tenant isn't going to get evicted in the future, regardless of what the landlord says, we can seal their record. There isn't any movement in that bill to make landlords whole. We were attempting to make it fair and equitable across the board to both landlords and tenants. So I think that I know my judges are willing to consider reviewing our sealing record again, and hear some positive feedback from it. But you've got a Senate bill at the moment sitting out there, so this may go statewide.
Mm-hmm. Abby, any experience in Cleveland with that?
Yeah, we actually have a local rule. I think it sounds very similar to the one that was proposed up here. It was adopted in 2019 and has a lot of the similar aspects, the similar terms. So there are, under Ohio law, there are a few routes to having a record sealed. There's the inherent authority of the court to seal a record, and that's like a weighing of, is there a public interest in that record being available to the public, or is it the detriment to this person more burdensome than that public interest? There's Rule 45, which also, I'm not going to bore you with the legal theory behind that, but that's another route, and then this adoption of rules. But as you can imagine, and with the adoption of rules, often many courts have provided the documentation or the form that a tenant needs to produce or to file with the court in order for it to be done. So they do make it easy for, the whole purpose is to let this happen. And then Franklin County actually has, their clerk of courts they don't make accessible to the public via their electronic online docket system any eviction record over 3 years. You can still try to go look it up at the clerk's office, but it makes it far less accessible. But you can imagine that even that aspect of tenant protection is hard for tenants to do if they don't know how to do it. And again, legal representation, it's often a part of how we settle a case. We also say, do you agree to seal the record to the other side? And that's one of the critical parts of settling a case that helps our clients.
Mm-hmm. Great.
keep in mind one of the things that when you hear the difference between Cleveland and Akron, Cleveland has a housing court that is codified.
Yeah.
So they have different authorities that they're able to implement because they have been given the authority through the state legislature. They're only one of two in the state of Ohio at this time. They're very costly. The housing courts are very costly to the community. Our court has recently, under the direction of the administrative judge, Judge Cable, we have proposed what we call a housing program. And that is not going to be a codified housing court, but it is going to be a program that is going to allow us to work closely with City Council and the City of Akron to maybe get some legislation in our Akron city codes, like expungement and sealing, that would then be in effect, that it isn't just a local rule that is going to be scrutinized based on the Ohio law, because every one of our local rules, if it is a conflict with the state of Ohio or a state of law, it can't go into effect too. So, there's some question on that. But if it becomes a city ordinance, that's a whole different ballgame for us. So our housing court, in addition to providing some services to maybe avoid the eviction and get landlords paid, as well as keep tenants in their home, by offering some more information that maybe a tenant didn't have available, as well as some staff that will assist through the eviction process in a neutral way. We feel that working with the city council to maybe update some of the municipal codes that will reflect better protections to both landlords and tenants, because sometimes it feels like it's very landlord-sided to the tenants, and the tenants and the landlords feel like it's tenant-sided. It just depends on how that day went for you guys. We want there to be city ordinance in place that will give the protections. And that I will leave to Mr. Malik now.
There you go, just putting the ball in my court. I think the important point from there is that it's so important that we all row in the same direction when it comes to the Akron Municipal Court, Akron City Council, the mayor's office. You know, we all have a role to play, whether it's legislating, whether it's implementing and enforcing our housing code, whether it's actually managing the process of housing court, right? And, you know, Magistrate Hardaway mentioned how expensive a housing court can be, and I'm not going to downplay that. But what I am going to say is, how expensive is it not to do that, right? Because when we say we have the highest eviction rate in the state of Ohio, what is that churn doing to landlords and tenants, right? It's not like a landlord enjoys the housing, the municipal court housing experience, I think, tremendously, right? And it's a churn to always find new tenants. It's a churn to always make repairs and things like that. And I think we want a more stable system, a system that works for everyone. And that might create some pressure points here and there for folks if we're enforcing housing conditions a little bit stronger, or if we're requiring a little bit more mediation. But I think overall it leads to a better picture at the end of the day for everyone. We have more than half of the households in our city rent, right? This has tremendous impacts to people in terms of their health, their transportation, their education, their safety.
I know that they're noting that it's the Q&A session, but I wanted to make one point with regards to the housing program. One of the things that our housing program that we have put in is actually assistance for the landlords to make their properties better. Judge Walker in our court is going to head that part, especially for landlords or owner-occupied, because that is part of our housing issue, is owner-occupied properties who are not able to make the repairs that are necessary. And they're now getting fined criminally. But Judge Walker, with the assistance of this program, will be able to put landlords who are going to be part of the evictions or can barely make the roof repairs in touch with the right people in our community to get the assistance, because there's assistance for landlords as well to keep their properties in check. There isn't a reason, if the landlords are also seeking out the assistance that we have in our community, that they can't get the necessary repairs as well. We, just as the judiciary, can't be the social service part. But we can, through the program that we have suggested, through mediation and through a fair and equitable system, can at least give everyone the tools to try to get the information they need, so that if they have to come in front of us, they've exhausted all of their remedies before they have me make a decision.
Well, this is great. I do want to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, Josh is back there. If you would raise your hand, and Josh can get the microphone to you.
Hi, my name's Shayna Carino, Direct Service Provider for Project Rise, Akron Public Schools. I am coming from the angle of how to advise families who are in this situation. One of the gaps I'm hearing here is what does the escrow process look, or what pathways do families have when they are living in conditions they don't feel like the lease is being met, they don't feel like the conditions of the home are being met, if they're in a subsidized program, a housing choice voucher or HUD housing, and they're not the ones physically paying the rent?
That's a great question.
If they're in the housing choice voucher program, we would recommend that they inform their landlord of those issues, of whatever the conditions issues are, and then they also contact the housing authority to come out and do an inspection. They should do an inspection, and based on sort of the level of emergency that housing condition is, it could be a few weeks or it could be in a couple of days. Then if that inspection shows that there are repairs that need to be made, they will inform the landlord and give them a certain period of time to make those repairs, and then they will come back out to do an inspection. If it's a HUD building that is like a Section 8 project base, so the subsidy is with the building, not with the tenant, they should call the HUD complaint line. There is somebody on the other side, and that is the best way for HUD to know that there's a problem. So they should, go through whatever the pathway is in their building to try to get a work order in. But if it's not met, then they should go to HUD and make a complaint. And always recommend that they contact the local legal aid because they may be able to get some help through them.
Hi, my name is Jordan Cotler. I'm a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society of Greater Cincinnati. And so we are quite behind you all in ordinances and enforcement of ordinances. And so this question, I sort of have a two-part question for Magistrate Hardway and Abby. The first is, so we passed a pay-to-stay ordinance in September, and our local courts announced that they would not be enforcing it because they believe it conflicts with Ohio state law. And so for Magistrate Hardway, if your court did any analysis of that at the time, or if you've seen any legal challenges to that, that's sort of the first part of the question.
We have not seen any challenges to it. We have not seen that many actual individuals coming with all the money. Mm-hmm. It is a lot of it. But what our court does is, if the individual comes to the court with the money that they got on a letter or however notification, and they say, here is all that money, we will hold it for the landlord can pick it up, mm-hmm. And they have to dismiss their case, or we're going to deny it. Mm. We have not seen a challenge come through. We're in the 9th district. I have not had an appeal yet for the ones that have had to. As long as evidence is presented to us at the hearing that an offer was made that of all of the money that was owed, and the late fees are within the allowed amounts, because there are many leases that do not have proper late fees, so we can reduce those. And they have, shown credible evidence that they, in fact, have attempted to pay it, and the landlord has said, no, their case is going to get denied.
Have there been any legal challenges in Cleveland?
There's, Cleveland does not have a pay-to-stay ordinance, but there's a number of municipalities throughout Cuyahoga County that do. And so what I've seen with the pay-to-stay ordinances, there's sort of two camps that they fall in. One camp of how they are drafted is that they still allow the court to have discretion. It's drafted as an affirmative defense. So if the tenant comes to court with all the money, they can affirmatively say, which is just sort of codifying a defense that we already had, which was the equity defense, but it does definitely strengthen it. The other sort of form of that ordinance is where the court really doesn't have discretion. The ordinances are framed in such a way that if the tenant tenders the rent, the landlord shall take it and inform the court, and the court shall dismiss the case. So clearly there is a difference in how those operate. And so we've had a couple of challenges in Cleveland Heights where that have been difficult, because we've had like the rent assistance organization testify as a witness that they have the money, they've offered it. We had actually one of the great advocates in this area as an expert talk about how this is supposed to work, and it still was denied, or just the eviction was granted. So, and that actually the eviction wasn't granted because we ended up going out of the court and making a settlement. But anyways, we are sort of waiting for the right case to challenge that particular ruling. And so these are really new laws, and so there isn't a whole lot of case law yet, but I think we will start seeing it, as time passes. And just to Cincinnati, you guys have had a source of income discrimination law on the books since the 90s.
Oh, don't get me started.
So, so that's great. I just want to say.
Yeah, well, it's not. It has never been enforced. So.
Well, that is an issue.
Yeah. But the second part of my question is: have you seen any cases where I foresee a circumstance where the tenant, between the time they receive the notice and the complaint is filed, they offer to pay all past due rent and late fees? Landlord denies. It goes to court, and then the court says, well, now you have to also tender court costs. And in that situation, it seems like the tenant shouldn't be required to tender court costs because, they tried to pay before the eviction filing. Has that situation presented itself for either of you yet?
That's what I would argue.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if the court has seen that situation.
I don't think we've seen it.
I think that's going to be to the discretion of the magistrate that's going to hear that case.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So far, great questions. I think we have several more here.
I do just quickly want to go back to your question. The rent escrow process is also an option for people who are in subsidized housing. Yeah. They are not left out of that. Even if someone pays like $10 as their portion, they can still escrow that $10, $5, whatever it is. And I do believe like the issue of if your rent is zero has come up. Like how do you access that rent escrow? And in fact, it was just like on a listserv in the last few days. So I think that is still sort of like an open question of how to use it if your rent amount is zero. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Deborah Holman, and I have a comment, but also a question to the panel at large. When it comes, I just recently went through the process of escrowing my rent. And then when it comes to landlords, there needs to be, the question to the panel is, what is the support that you have for tenants in situations where it comes to eviction, escrow, challenging the landlord with repairs? Because it took me a whole year. And it actually got done last month. Even though I escrowed my rent In November, the court ruled in my favor, returned my money. The landlord still would not do what needed to be done. And it was 2 years about the balcony, but a year about my apartment. And I am disabled with health issues. I called every number, every agency I could think of in the city of Akron. And it literally left me in tears because nobody would help. And it got to the point that when I got to the courts, because I had the documentation, I believe, where I began to make notes about what happened, who I called, the time, the date, and all that, and I had a calendar. And that's actually how I met Attorney Petit. He asked me, was I a lawyer in a previous life? No, but I had been through so much as a tenant trying to make the landlords accountable for the living conditions. And so my question to the panel is, what preventive measures can you come up with to support tenants, whether it's eviction, whether it's repairs, because tenants need support. And the landlord, the law used to be in favor of the landlord, is now in favor of the tenant if you take them to court. So when you go in their pocket, it does get their attention, but I found out in the long process, threatening with the media make them move a little faster. Because I used Prosecutor Walsh calendar. I called all those numbers. I called the street card. I mean, I literally called everyone I could think of in Akron. And I heard the phrase, "I'm so sorry," that I don't ever want to hear that phrase ever again in life. But tenants need someone to not just say, okay, this is not right, but actually to make these people accountable for not making the repairs in a timely manner. So what support are you willing to put out there to help the tenants so that it doesn't take a whole year or longer to get changes made that are necessary for our health as well as safety?
Absolutely. And, when you were talking, the first thing that I wanted to say is because people call me on this council cell phone and they tell me stories like this. And the first thing I say is the thing that you don't want to hear, right? Just that I'm so sorry. Because no one should have to go through a system like this, right? And we can all recount lots of stories of folks who are playing by every rule, who are calling all the numbers, who are doing all the things that are right. And the bureaucracy that we have just is failing people, right? And there is no easy solution, and I'll leave it to my esteemed colleagues. I'm sure they have ideas. But one of the things that we can do is make sure that at every level of the system that we're trying to really listen, right? Listen and slow down and to really hear what people are saying and to go back and fix the system for the next person, right? Because, for example, when someone calls to make a housing complaint, right, they might call 311, but if they don't give all of the correct information, that's not necessarily going to be followed up on, right? And it might not be followed up on even in a timely fashion. It took years of us saying, of folks, advocates in the community saying we don't have enough housing inspectors to get 3 more housing inspectors. But when I said that, it's not the end of the line. Those people haven't been trained. Those people haven't been hired, right? And so, it is unbelievably frustrating. And I know that everyone here has experienced that frustration even more than me.
I'm sorry. I was one of the ones that said I'm sorry to Deborah, and she's in one of the unique things we have in Summit County is when we merged, the 3 health departments here merged about 12 years ago, and that was Summit County, Akron, and Barberton. But certain things did not come to Summit County Public Health, such as housing. They do have their own housing division. So we often have people that reside in the city of Akron that call us. and we are very limited to what we can do. I mean, I think I was out a couple times at Deborah's house because I felt really bad for her and trying to figure out how can I best support her in this role. So that, how many phone calls though? I mean, she had to call me 5-6 times. So it's very frustrating, and they don't, and the tenants don't often understand there's two different authorities working in this county regarding housing.
I would first like to say, Deborah, I totally salute you in your tenacity and the effort that you made to get what you needed done. And I think we should just give you a round of applause. I mean, that you have done what so many people want to do, and you got eventually what you needed. But I think what you brought to us today is the voice of all of those people, and you have explained to this group here why it doesn't ever get done, why the escrow process doesn't get done, why it is so difficult to get a tenant to try to get the repairs made, the conditions fixed, because it is a nightmare. It is so much work. You probably spent hours and hours and hours of your life trying to do that. And I think we can agree that that is wrong. And so, Councilman Malik, I'm going to actually put it back in your lap that it sounds like we need to have some changes in our ordinances and our laws in order to support our community in making sure that they're living in healthy, safe, stable housing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I feel that sense of urgency. I think a lot of people in the community do. I know the judges and my colleagues here who do as well, but really there are so many issues, and I know in the coming weeks council is actually, what's the date, May 24th? April 24th. We're going to be holding a town hall later on in the month, and we're going to have a series of them, and then we're going to have a council task force that's going to be working on some of these issues. But there are so many examples of things that do need to be changed. We have a county rental registry and a city rental registry for the same things. I mean, if I was a housing provider, I'd be frustrated. But if I was the judges, I would also be frustrated because which set of registration are you supposed to follow, right? And that's, again, we shouldn't have to explain to people, well, there are two different sets of authorities, right? It doesn't matter, right? It's not efficient for anyone. So there are so many changes that we need to make, and I'm not sitting here and asking anyone to be okay with the status quo. Everyone needs to be pushing, and everyone has a role to play, right? It's not just the folks who are in leadership positions, but we have 190,000 people in this community. Everyone needs to be pushing for changes. Absolutely.
Well, one thing, too, that we didn't get to talk about solutions and things to do is tenants have been getting together to form tenant unions, and I wanted to congratulate Ms. Holman. She also not only did a great job with basically doing all the work. I came along for the ride in the court case, but she also is a tenant union president for her apartment complex, and just. Yeah, absolutely.
Accountability is the biggest word. That you landlords accountable, and as well as maybe considering having the various agencies network together where you can make one phone call and get the help that you need, or at least, and then also with the city of Akron, holding them accountable, because it's like, when I contacted them, they said, okay, we will notify them and we'll let them know they have so many days to make these corrections. And then when I asked, okay, what happens after you do that so many times? And it's like, I was told, they're just gonna keep asking them. And I'm saying, okay, they've shown you like 3 times, 45 days, that they're not going to do what needs to be done. What do you do? What's the next step? And it appeared to me like nobody wanted to find them or whatever the next procedure is. It's like, so if you're not holding them or making them accountable, then they're gonna keep the landlords, that's how they hold the tenant down. And then if you don't wanna comply with what they want, then they want to go with the eviction. But I think I had them ask themselves the question, when did I move this crazy person in here? Because I was willing to fight even with the eviction. You're not getting my money anymore and not making the things or the changes. And I mainly did it even though agency was saying, you can't do that. I, as a previous preschool teacher, can't is not a word that I taught my children. Can't is not a word. Because it's the two words. Anything you set out to do. And that was one thing I proved to Mr. Curry, the fair housing advocate. I said, I did it. He's like, you did? I'm like, yes, I did it. I escrowed my money. The court gave me my money back. And he was like, wow, I need a copy of that. I'm like, why? He didn't help me. I told other people that it can't be done. I used to advocate for seniors prior to becoming a senior. I had no idea that when I became a senior, I'd be going through all of this. But I did it mostly to show people that you can do it. You have to, my mom taught me to teach people how to treat you. And if they're not treating us right, then we have to make them, and it starts with us. And so at White Pond Villa, we've been on the news a lot, but we are now getting things accomplished and things achieved. But it's not even, it's just the beginning because there are so many other apartment places here in Akron where people are in worse conditions than we are. And someone needs to be made accountable.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ms. Holman, and really, I want to congratulate everybody for being here because even though we've identified there are problems, we've also identified some solutions. And one of the greatest things that we have here in Akron is a sense of community and people coming together and wanting to get things done. And you know, we at Legal Aid cover 8 counties, so we see different areas. And Akron and Summit County really is a testament of just having this event here today of the willingness of the community to come together. So I want to thank all the panelists. A great job. Thank our audience, and can we have a round of applause for our speakers? And so I'm not negligent here. I think the next session they want us in there by 10:40. And that is starting at 10:45. So I apologize that we didn't get to the rest of the questions, but thank you very much.
Thanks for all you do.
No, thank you, and thanks for my process of the
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were back there.
So how old are your daughters that are playing lacrosse?
I have a senior. She's primarily field hockey. She's going to play in college. And then I have
And for what school?
Wittenberg.
Whitman, okay.
Yep. And then both of them play lacrosse. She'll be a freshman next year. She'll be a freshman next year. Yeah.
So I have one that is sophomore in college. One that's a senior at Logan, sophomore at Walsh, and then a third grader at I Promise.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we all go to the same school. We're all in Stowe, but yeah, the college thing is
So you
creeping
know
up fast.
Rieglers?
Yes.
Jake Riegler? Yeah, so my son's played hockey with him, and the Shalines, and Ray Ban. I don't know if you know.
Oh, who's
They're all hockey.
Yes. I went to high school with the Barlows.
Okay, yeah, no
And
Barlows.
then, Nitrates. Oh, shocking.
I think they are.
Yes. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean,
Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin the intersection of health and housing panel discussion. Going to let people come in at a time. We do have one panelist that is running a little bit late, so she will be joining us momentarily. My name is Tamika Rose. I am the Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Horrigan in the city of Akron. And you might be wondering why I'm up here to be a moderator for the panel. My first title with Mayor Horrigan was Health Equity Ambassador, and what we were working on was infant mortality. And what we found out in discovering the social determinants of health around infant mortality is that housing was one of the key indicators of a mother having a preterm birth and or having her baby not make it to the first birthday. So it became a very high priority on our list. And we are now one of the bold goals for United Way. We want to get our black babies, our black infant mortality rate to be the same as the white infant mortality rate of 6 per 1,000 births. Right now it is at 15.3 in Summit County. We want to lower that to 6 by 2028. And we're going to do that by focusing a lot on the health care, but a lot on the housing as well, and other medical opportunities. But I wanted to take the time to introduce the panelists. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves and why they are on this panel, and then we will get into the panel discussion. So, yes, Erica, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica Malone. I am a community health worker with SUMA's African Centering Pregnancy and Parenting Program. I am also a doula in training, a lactation consultant, and teen mother. I'll give more to my backstory here shortly, but thank you all for coming. Thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Dr. Davidson.
Good morning. My name is Joel Davidson. I'm a general pediatrician at Akron Children's Hospital. I work in an office called Locus Pediatrics in my clinical work, but I also joined this panel as an expert in lead. I'm the kind of regional lead expert along with my co-director. We operate the lead clinic where children who are exposed to elevated rates of lead come to us if they need additional evaluation and treatment.
Keith.
Good morning. I'm Keith Stahl, Director of Residential Services and Operations for Community Support Services. We are a healthcare organization that focuses primarily on mental health. And so we do all the street outreach pretty much for the community. And so we're really working with some of the most vulnerable individuals in our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Owens. I'm from Summit DD. We represent and provide services to over 4,000 individuals with disabilities in Summit County. I'm a manager in our Community Supports and Development Department, which connects people to community organizations in the areas of residential, direct service supports. We also work with transition age youth and anybody from birth to the end of life.
D.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dee McCall. I am a community organizer with the Freedom Block and also a co-facilitator for a peer support group for women transitioning out of incarceration through South Street Ministries. I am one of the lead organizers for the Housing is a Right campaign and a coalition, and I am just here speaking on behalf of the tenants of Akron.
Thank you. So we're going to start with Erica. Now, Erica's a dear friend because she does work with us on Full Term First Birthday. As she mentioned, she works at Summa Health and is a doula in training and a lactation consultant as well. But Erica has a unique story, and she inspires me every day. I'm not going to give her story. Are you able to do it today? You want me to do it or you got it? Okay. We're going to pray for Erica because she came here today, and she's on her way to a funeral. So violence plagues all of our families, and so I just want to ask you to just pray for Erica during this time, and I'm going to let her talk about how where you live affects your health.
So again, Tamika, thank you for asking for prayers and grace. I do want to let you all know that being a community health worker definitely plays a major part in who I am and how I move from day to day. I am celebrating my oldest son's 28th birthday today that I had at the age of 13, who turned out to be one of the most amazing men I have ever encountered in my life. He is a Marine, and he saved people in Australia when they were having brush fires and a whole host of other things. But today is also very bittersweet for me because I am burying my stepdaughter today, who was killed in Akron due to gun violence. She's 21 years old, mother of 2. So I am not here just in regards to myself and the family and the community. I am a testament of what growing up in the hood is, can do, will be, can turn into. Where you live, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with regard to the social determinants of health, anxiety, toxic stress, having easier access to guns and weed than you do fresh produce. Understand the impact that we all have as individuals to make sure that each one of us shows up daily in the greatest version of who we are. Our zip codes should not affect us the way that they do. Unfortunately, again, all of us that are present, we know that to be true. So I'm saying all of this to say, and I asked Tamika if I could have an ask before, because I can go on and on. I had my second child at the age of 15, but because of my determination as an individual and to get past the drug and alcohol addictions that plague my family to this day, I was determined to not be a typical teen mom, which is why I stand in the gap now and provide services for the women that I care for. Take some time to get to know your city officials, county officials, policymakers. Us knocking on doors and asking is dead. It's time out for it. So now we are at a place where we need to hold one another accountable. We need to make sure these policies and procedures are actually signed and set in place and held as they should be, and not as just another meeting for us to pass the time. I want to thank y'all and ask again for more grace with regard to this. All of us that provide services to these families, I ask that you meet them where they are with an open heart and an open mind, and understand that they just didn't show up 15 minutes late because they didn't have anything else better to do. They're having car problems, underpaid, under-resourced. I'm asking for grace on behalf of the people that I stand in the gap for. Medical professionals, doctors, nurses, when these women and men and families show up for their doctor's appointments, don't just shut them down and disregard them because they showed up late and it's a glitch in our systems. You have no idea what they had to do to get there. It's a whole lot of y'all that I'm trying very hard not to make eye contact with, because if I do, I'm gonna break down.
Well, Erica, as I always do, I'm gonna take a pause for you, and then I'm gonna transition to D. So D, Erica highlighted some of the social determinants of health that I know that you and the Freedom Bloc are trying to rectify in our city. So can you talk about how you envision building healthy neighborhoods? What types of things should we be taking into consideration, and how does Akron's existing neighborhoods measure up?
That was a loaded question. I will break
But I
that
knew where I was placing it. So
yes. So I'll start with how do we build those healthy community or healthy neighborhoods? For me, I feel as though that we should invest in the community by developing different programs for the community by the community. Social programs over the years have proven to alleviate a lot of violence in the communities, and a lot of issues that are at hand now are because there is nothing for the community to do. Intergenerationally, it comes from the seniors down to the children. So if we do create equitable programs for the community that is truly intergenerational, we will occupy the time of the community, which will build those relationships. So we will get to know our neighbors, we'll get to know those ladies down the street, and then understand who's who in our neighborhoods. And once we're able to identify that, that's when we'll start bringing that village mentality back. And you said, how does Akron's existing neighborhoods measure up?
yes.
It is truly black and white. It's either the neighborhood is highly funded or not funded at all. So if we identify the inequities within our neighborhoods, we can see that certain neighborhoods haven't been funded for generations. It makes no sense as to why there are generations of people that are truly just disenfranchised while other sides of the neighborhood is truly affluent and thriving. So we just want to identify the disconnect and then really figure out ways of building those bridges, because every ward gets funding, yet we can't tell. You see the south side being dilapidated, you see the east side, and you see the west side, the north side as well. I feel as though there aren't too many neighborhoods that truly reflect the city of Akron in its entirety, because we're a very diverse city, yet it's truly black and white, where it's highly funded or it's not. So I don't believe that Akron's neighborhoods measures up, because we could do a lot better.
So I'm gonna ask you a follow-up. So what types of things should we be taking into consideration to allow for Akron's neighborhoods to measure up?
We should take into consideration that those that are poverty-stricken are also trauma-induced. So when you're going into these situations, you have to go trauma-informed. You can't expect what your experience is compared to their experience. And also when having these conversations with the trauma, it's never ending, and you have to give that grace. With these organizations, like Erica said, we have to be graceful. We have to identify that not all the time everyone has that access to resources, that access to education. or just the access of knowledge of knowing that that resource is allotted to them. There are so many different programs that are allotted to the community, yet getting that message out to everyone in the community has been lacking. Due to the fact that some neighborhoods may seem a little more uncomfortable than others, however, that was systematically made. Based in the book, The Color of Law, a lot of the issues that were in hand is because of the structures that were made. And no one is truly speaking out against it. And here we are now speaking about issues that many studies that were funded, highly funded, identified that there is an inequity within the city. And this is across the nation. So I would say that we should implement programs that is for the community, by the community, and truly bring the people that are directly impacted to the tables to assist and collaborate on how to really get into the community. Because if you're coming in as an outsider, that's colonizing. You're imposing your right onto other people when there may be a disconnect. So I just invite people to bring those who are truly directly impacted to the table to make decisions together as a collaborative and not like a dictatorship.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So we talk about accessibility, and we also talk about diversity and inclusion. And I'm sure none of you watch the city council hearings, but when we were moving towards the pay to stay and source of income legislation, my case was that this was not just about Black women. This was about disabled individuals as well, and people that didn't have enough money. So this was not just about the Black woman, even though, I know that's what people were thinking, but a lot of disabled individuals get turned down for housing too. And this is a conversation about the intersection of health and housing. So I wanted to ask Jackie and Keith, what does accessibility in housing truly mean?
So at Summit DD Accessibility in Housing, we know that right now the access to housing is at a minimum. That affects the community of people with disabilities as well. And then on top of that, accessible housing. So people that might need some modifications to their home to be able to live independently. We're also at a different time and a different point over the last few years with individuals that in housing, there were group homes or congregate settings, people living in larger groups, 5, 6 people. People with disabilities now, and there is a large charge for people to live more independently and not so much in those type of settings. So now we have people that are moving out into the community looking for accessible housing, affordable housing, quality housing, and running into the same barriers that people on fixed incomes or other marginalized populations do. So our job right now at Summit DD is to reach out and connect with our community to provide access for people with disabilities to housing, as well as connecting with the community in a way where we can provide the services or connect with people who might need our services to be included in their communities.
So kind of building on that, so much of what is needed is what the individual wants. And so we really have to take the individual into account, have that conversation with them, and how can we provide those supports to that individual where they want to live. So it's not about us telling them, where they're going to live and what have you, but that they're involved in that so that they have some ownership over that. Even if they're not a home owner, they still have some ownership over that housing that they have. And it's about building more opportunities. So, if you look at an individual that's living off of $750 a month, your opportunities are incredibly limited on where you're going to live. And so you're more or less told this is the housing that's available to you as opposed to choosing that housing. So we've really worked hard, with Akron, the city of Akron, and other community partners to develop additional types of housing. And the housing that we need as an 18-year-old is much different than what we need at 30 and 50 and 70 and 90. And so we really have to have all different types or a continuum of housing where people are able to move within that continuum. And the way that many of our housing programs are set up is that you aren't able to move up and down that continuum based upon your needs. And so you end up kind of stuck. And so that is a piece of accessibility that is often lost on many of our housing programs. And so we're really, we've really worked hard to try and create exit strategies so people can move on to more independent setting. If maybe they're starting in a group home or, a halfway house or something like that, that they can start there and then continue to grow with that as they continue to recover. People with mental health issues, on average, die 25 years earlier than people that don't have mental health issues. And one of the reasons is the environment that they live in. And so they often don't have access to food, transportation. Some of their medications cause side effects, and also they often have negative symptoms, which tend to make people a little less active. And so you add all these elements together, and you've really created a recipe for being very unhealthy. And the type of housing you live in has a huge role in how that those health disparities can play out. So, housing is really, really a key piece of that, and having that accessibility and being able to change within housing is key as well.
Thank you. So, Dr. Davidson, from a medical perspective, patient health conditions can be created or exacerbated by their housing. How do or don't our existing systems link care for these conditions with the governmental agencies that oversee housing conditions?
Say the second part again.
All right. So how do or don't our existing systems link care for these conditions with the governmental agencies that oversee housing conditions? I think we discussed this a little bit. It was kind of like, so how does lead impact and mold impact our health, and how does HUD coming in, how does that help us or hurt us? And what do we need to change?
Well, there's a lot to this connection between where you live and how healthy you are. We've kind of outlined the complexity of that, and I think some of this starts with just breaking that complexity down into a little bit more of a relationship-based model. And I think that's what Dee was talking about a little bit earlier when she was mentioning some of the disparities. I think we're lacking true relationships. From a health perspective, can we think about classic environmental problems like lead? We can also talk about mold and smoke exposure, those sorts of things. It's not really that hard to draw this line between those environments and poor health outcomes. But what do we really mean by health outcomes? We have all these proxies that we talk about, and you can talk about of course something like life expectancy or infant mortality or rates of blood pressures or hospitalizations or emergency room visits, and all of this adds to the complexity, quite honestly. And it's really not what we're talking about. When we talk about what is health, we're talking about the fulfillment of the potential of a life to be allowed to do what that life is good at. That's kind of what I think of when I think about health. And we all kind of know what health is when we see it. And we know what it looks like when we don't see it. And it really is based on environment. There's a lot, from a pediatrician's perspective, there's so much pruning, there's so much modeling, there's so much that happens in these first really early years, probably even right after a conception, the development of a pregnancy, the support of that woman throughout that pregnancy, how that person is cared for by the people around them throughout that life trajectory. But especially early on in life, it really does lend to some pruning, some modeling, some rerouting of brain functioning, some ability to respond to stress. And we're talking about stress. This is all really stressful. And I'm not talking about the stress that I feel like as a speaker up here. My hands are getting a little, sweaty. It's the stress that is complicating and confounding and reciprocal and cyclical. It's the stress that we're all trying to break in the discussions that we're having. Gosh, this room is incredible. This conference is amazing. We have some strengths, but how do we start to then, on the healthcare side, we're really good at measuring stuff. And kind of one of the things that I think that we can fix is try to measure what matters. Let's measure the stuff that we really care about. Let's have some honest conversations. What are we actually trying to accomplish?
Right.
My major health output as a pediatrician is probably high school graduation. But it's not even just high school graduation. It's like, did you graduate and really find something that you're good at?
Right.
Did you find an environment in your educational system that you found people that cared about you? Because we know that those things matter. Does your parent have somebody to turn to when something really devastating happens? Those are the things that matter, but we can't measure them very well. And we can't assess for them very adequately. I have 20 minutes. I love to talk to the people that I talk to in 20 minutes, and I really try to develop a really strong, trusting relationship over time as a doctor with my patients and their families. I really, really want to try to demonstrate the respect that I have for mostly women. And for dads that are out there, I give you credit. Dads, we need really good dads. Kids really do thrive when they have good fathers. They graduate high school more often. Their ultimate lifetime attainment of income is higher. But we're talking about mostly moms in a tough time. Parenting's difficult. Everybody in this room that's a parent knows that that's hard. So how do we start to then connect those real situations that are happening in people's lives to a system that ultimately is not always trusted? And I'm not talking about just healthcare, but let's be honest. A lot of the systems that we've put into place have led to mistrust. There's a lot of roots to that, but I think a lot of that is rooted in relationship. Does everybody even know what everybody else is doing? Does everybody even respect the things that the efforts that they're putting forward? I think that that's what Erica was starting with a little bit in some of her comments was, I got my kid here. In our office, we work really, really hard to see people that come. And you're shaking your head. Thank you. And if you're in my office, I will see you. Sometimes it's a little hard to communicate to my staff what those rules and policies are. So now I'm going to run into that second part of your question.
Okay.
How do we connect those things that we know as care service providers, as people who are trusted individuals within the structures of individuals and families? How do we move those things to an honest discussion within the community about what is really needed? I'm going to kind of go back to one of the things that Keith mentioned, which is let's listen to people. Let's sit around and let's sit across from each other, with each other, and ask the question, what do you need? And let's let that honest answer be the thing that guides us into those policy decisions, into those allocation of resources. And let's get rid of the barrier in a lot of ways that is, oh, you're just saying that because you want something. Let's look at it as, you're saying that because you need something. And we know, and all of this, in my mind, is let's respect the person that's bringing forward that part of their life that they're willing to share. So, Tamika, you are very good at how to make all that work in the whole government system policy-making section. And I'm a big thinker, and I like to think about these concepts, but we got to start to really be honest about what it is that we really need.
I appreciate that. You could say something real quick because I have a question for Dee, so I don't want to forget.
So I just wanted to speak to the fact that Akron and Summit County are very resource rich. We have a great deal of programs and procedures and agencies. We have awesome programming. We have back to school things. We have post-secondary education. We have green spaces. We have public parks. Like Dee was speaking to earlier, where I live on the west side of Akron is a great example of healthcare, mental health, and green spaces and everything coming together in a very, very precise and decisive area, and it's awesome and it is utilized. However, because we have lapses in communication, or so many of our organizations and agencies are not connected, we drop the ball very often. It is absolutely pointless to have all of these resources available and have so many community members have no idea these programs exist. So this is one of those things for me to ask everybody that is here present again today, now that you've been made aware of some of the things that we do have that are available, go knock on your neighbor's door and ask them if they are aware. Take the time out to get to know somebody, and like Joel was just saying, when you ask a person what they need, don't assume you have the answer to their problem. Don't try to fix people. Hear them out, understand what resources that you can assist them in getting connected to, and find out a way to get them connected. We have some amazing organizations and people and places, resources in place here in this area. But again, it falls on deaf ears if nobody knows about it. So get to know where you live. Get to know your neighbor outside of church functions. For any and all pastors and clergy and ministers, everybody hear my heart, because I am ordained as well. However, sometimes you got to meet somebody on the street corner. Sometimes you see a homeless person, you go buy them a burger instead of talking at them, trying to get an understanding of where they are, why they are, or some people choose the life that they have, and we have to be okay with it. But the ones that don't, as humans, we are now obligated. We know different now, so we can show up differently. That's all.
Thank you. So, Dr. Davidson, thank you for the accolades, but I work with a team, and a lot of them are sitting in the audience. I don't know, and I tell people, I don't know everything, and when you pose a problem, I will try to fix it, but sometimes I can't fix it, but we will work together to fix the problem and change the policies. But in our conversation earlier this week, I made a statement, and I said, well, you know, we change these things, but nobody does anything about it. And so Erica just alluded to the fact of go out, you've learned things today. So go talk to your neighbors and say, do you know that this occurs? I think one of the gems in our community is 211. If you have a problem, you can call 211. They will help you. And if they don't have the resources to help you, they will call the city or the county to find out how they can assist that person. But with that being said, Dee brought up the piece that some people have so much trauma that they don't even know where to begin. So Dee, could you talk a little bit more about the trauma that we don't see every day and we overlook, and some of our employees need to take into consideration when people do come to our doorsteps and ask for help?
Thank you. I just want to let y'all know people are dying in these houses, and these conditions are making them sick to lead to death. So it is truly a state of emergency. Many people are experiencing tragedy and life circumstances that leads them into many mental health issues. We're not able to identify all of the issues that these tenants are experiencing because they are the working poor. Because bills never stop, they have to constantly work, so they have to persevere. People are dying in these apartments. People are getting these diseases because their units are infested with rodents and roaches. We have women that have histoplasmosis that is only received by exposure to rat poop. Yet these issues continue to come to the table of these leaders that deals with housing, yet it's still unaddressed. And we have these tenants that bring these issues to everyone who is anyone. City officials, county officials, federal officials. I even had conversations with the Secretary of HUD. All of these issues have been addressed, yet it's still taking its time. And in that time that is being taken, people are still dying. It is a state of emergency. And within that, people are still having to live with the death. They still have to live with these conditions. We just heard earlier today that a woman was living in an apartment infested with rodents, and one crawled on her bed. That's traumatizing. We have to take into address how trauma shows up for people, because it doesn't show up similar to the rest. What trauma may look like in you, it may look completely different to the rest. And a lot of people are truly on autopilot. So they go to work, they go home, and they take care of their families, not understanding that people are truly at a mental war on the inside. When they're alone in the bathroom, they deal with their thoughts, they deal with their traumas to persevere, to continue. So we truly have to address how, if the house does not take care of the tenant cannot take care of the house. And if the person's house, which is their safety, is challenged, how can they feel safe in their own body? So we have to take into part how important housing is, because it truly is a human right. Yet us as people are not understanding that, because we continue to drive past these places that looks like eyesores. It's a nuisance in the community, yet people just drive past it as though that's how that's always been. How long are we going to continue to say that's how that's always been? Neighborhoods should never not be funded because that's how it's always been. So we're in a day and age of this shift, of this transition, that we need to start putting money into these houses and really hold people accountable. Like Erica said, no one is talking to anyone. I have been able to talk to anyone who is anybody about housing, and the shifts have not been made. Yes, the conversation has been brought to the attention of the leaders. However, the people are still living in these conditions, and people are dying. Again, they're dying.
Thank you. And at that time, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for any additional questions. I think they're coming with mics.
I'm going to stand up on this one. Thank everybody for attending and putting yourselves in my path, I should say. We talk about trauma, we talk about stress, but we don't talk about change. And this is what I'm hearing. And I just want to raise up one trauma that brings forth a domino effect for other traumas when it comes to housing. And I want to quote what Dr. Davidson said: when kids thrive when dad is around. Dad is not around. Dads are not allowed to be around, okay? Because those who are with subsidized housing, they cannot have the dads there. And not just that, for the dads who are homeless because of a moment in their time in their past, they now got labeled with a felon. Doesn't matter how long that they served their time or paid their restitution. This is a lifelong thing. So with dads not being around, we got stress on the parent, the mother that's there. We got stress on the kids who don't have that upbringing. We got stress on the finances because dad can't pay child support because dad can't get a job that allows him to do so and have a roof over his head. I'm saying it. So my question to you is, understanding the domino effect, how do you eliminate the stress of the separation of family?
I told you it was complicated.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to take the
Okay,
question
go
for you guys, okay? So my dear friend in the audience, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't work alone. We've been in the process of setting up a housing project for, well, housing pilot for pregnant moms that are in our community that are at risk of being homeless or at risk of being homeless. And we're going through all of the rules. And so I brought up that same thing. So I say things low and slow, and I get people really scared because I'm like, I don't even understand how we're gonna do this if the father can't be here. This makes no sense. And we were talking with a lady in Columbus, and she said, well, Tamika, that rule was changed. That rule was changed. And we were like, really? So Shalita and I were like, well, we need to see the page because we need to tell people in our community. So we need to look, when things do change, we need to change them in our community. The dad can be there. Even if he has a felony, the only thing that he can't be in the home with subsidized housing is if he has a if he's a sexual offender. But the felony no longer applies. And I think it was back before I was born. Was it before I was born, Shalita? Because I think I was like really crazy. Like, it was a long time ago that it had actually changed. And so we need to look and see and call, if we're in those places, see to where it can be changed, okay? Don't just think, like she said, it is what it is and that's just the way it's gonna be. No, we need to look and see, did it change? Can it be changed? We need to start looking and investigating if we are in those places so that we can help people. We come to these conferences all the time and say, oh, if we could only change these things. Well, now they have the ability to be changed. And if they are not changed now, we have the opportunity right now to change them because we have the right people in the federal offices and we need to change them now. So I think that those are some of the things that, you know, I know everybody gets into their rat race. I understand because I just came off a vacation and my calendar looked like crazy. But if you have time, you know, have some of your staff research, call. There are things that we can do to help these individuals. It's not that it's just, you know, because the father is not there. I think we need to update our policies here in the city of Akron.
Before we move on, can I respond?
Yep.
Ms. Tracy, I absolutely love you and your energy and your honesty and your transparency. So being the individual who I am and working with the women that I work with, we do provide services to the fathers within our program within certain parameters. So we try our best to not just provide these services to the women and the children, but we do understand the significance. We don't get pregnant on our own. It's a two-part thing, you know. So I'm saying all of that to say, with regard to SUMA and where I am now, we are taking steps to make sure we provide wraparound support services to the mothers, fathers, and children, and any additional support members that are providing or bridging the gap for those families. We do have a lot of grandparents that are, you know, providing care for the children and stuff, so we try to assist them as much as possible. And I've been surveying the room trying to see who all was here, and I could be wrong, but I don't see very many faces from Akron Metropolitan Housing Authority. Okay. Oh, okay. Hi. So I'm going to ask with regard to this, what are we doing to any media folk, any folks that have social platforms? What are we doing as individuals to make this knowledge known to the tenants, the people that are living in these houses? What are we doing to let them know that their significant others, boyfriend, baby dads, booze, boo thing, you know, whatever, fill in the blank type of thing? What are we doing to let them know that their significant others are welcome to live with them and it's not frowned upon? How many of our frontline people at a lot of these housing agencies are made aware that the fathers are welcome to come in? Because I am still an AMHA resident. And it was one of those things, I've been there for a decent amount of time. But when I was filling out my applications and things, the lady that was, you know, interviewing me at the time, she wasn't aware. So Tamika and I are very close in age. So if it happened before her born date, then I'm sure it happened before mine or around the same time, and I had no idea. So I'm saying all of that to say, again, lack of communication, a lack of understanding, a lack of information and wisdom. We cannot change these things until a lot of our frontline staff are made aware that these policies have been changed. A lot of these agencies that we interact with, a lot of the Department of Job and Family Services, if the frontline people, the folks that are the gatekeepers to the files, if they don't know, we can't help change this. So platforms, social platforms, newspapers, whoever is in this room, you are now accountable for helping us make it a story. I don't care what it looks like, get it out there. As of April 28, 2022, we now know that housing restrictions for fathers with felons or felonies, with an exception of sex offenses, can now reside with their, you know, significant other. I don't know what it looks like. I'm just saying, start the dialogue. We are here for such a time in a season as this.
D.
So at the Freedom Block, with the Housing is a Right coalition, we are actively building tenant unions within each housing complex in the city, where we are equipping the tenants with the resources and the education of what their rights are. We are actively just building that and building a good rapport within the tenant unions, within the tenant complexes. actively right now, we're understanding that there is a mental health issue. The neighbors are not getting along, nor do the neighbors care to even get to know each other. So we're really working towards building that good rapport to bring the village back. And our first efforts is starting tenant unions within each complex to build the momentum for them to be empowered and equipped with the resources that are allotted to them.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I don't know if this is the case or not, but on North Hawkins, there are, I think, senior apartments that are hosted by SUMA, and then they also have like the medical organization right there. What type of, what do we need to do to get more programs like that, if that is there, where like there's housing and then like the medical facility or access to it is right there? Because I know that transportation is a big deal for seniors, and I think the statistic is something like 10,000 people turn 65 every day now. So how do we get more programs like that, if that is a program? And what do we need to do to help to let people know it's a need?
I'll take it.
Who said that?
So I'm not exactly sure of that specific project, but I can say that we have done a number of developments through our organization and through other community partners where we've kind of taken that model on, where we have residents live there and then we bring in services on site, so that, you know, we have case managers on site, we have doctors that come in and provide that medical care, both psychiatric and physical care, to bring down those barriers and make it easier for individuals to engage in those services. And again, it's all about their choice. It's about what they want and how they want that service. So we don't mandate it. It's not a requirement, but it's available if they want to take advantage of it. So we are seeing a lot of those types of housing developments occur. I will say, though, that this is a kind of a national problem that we're having, that we're trying to solve on the local level. And, you know, HUD is not really funding housing development. So we do our housing development through the IRS, through tax credits primarily. So, you know, we have a lot of challenges in the community to bring in these types of housing and to make it more accessible to more individuals and to increase those services. But it is occurring. It just doesn't happen at the scale that we need. You know, you look at the homeless numbers across the country and they are just skyrocketing. And, you know, when I was a kid, homelessness didn't really exist. You know, it was not a thing. And so, you know, this is a pretty modern issue that we're having, that we're actually just repeating a cycle. If you look past, post-World War I, you had massive, these call them Hoovervilles, but these massive homeless encampments on the edges of towns. And we're really replicating that same issue that occurred long ago. And, you know, we know the answer, and the answer is housing. So, yeah.
Ms. Stevens.
So it's South Hawkins.
I usually think I talk too loud. I'm Cheryl Stevens, and I'm the president and CEO of EANDC. We did that development in partnership with Testa Builders. The first level is mixed-use retail organizational facility, and the upper levels are all seniors. And most of it's a variety of income levels, but it is exactly, is it Keith?
Yes.
It is exactly what Keith said. In order to do that type of development, we need the kind of financing that will make these kinds of projects that need low-cost money to make them happen, because we do not want the rents to be $1,200 to $1,500 a month. The rents need to be $600 to $800 a month, depending on whether you have a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom. It's for seniors. In the community areas, we provide services because we have a social worker on staff, and then we work with the county to get the right kind of social services coming in to the building itself, as well as having a tenant that provides great supportive services. So why is this more difficult to finance than anything else we do? Because the income streams that we can charge to generate from this property from the tenants is lowered because of their incomes. So what we need for you guys to do is to vote for people who will create financing that we can use at the local level.
Thank you.
Oh, can we?
Tamika,
I'll
can
get you.
can I answer
Yep.
that?
Mhm.
So
After that, I just want to just real quick. After you, then we'll go up here, and then we'll go over here. Okay? Okay.
So to answer that question from the healthcare perspective, I think it's an interesting question. Why don't healthcare just embed themselves into communities? And I wholeheartedly agree with that concept. I think it's all in. It's kind of a similar answer, I think, which is around resources. Is that are we able to do that on the scale that makes it worth it? And so I will answer that question also from the Akron Children's perspective. We think about the integration of that healthcare from a community perspective around schools. So welcome education into this discussion because where do kids spend most of their time and where are they accessible? That's in the school building. And so we've as an organization have a significant investment in moving this community school-based model, which is similar on the adult side to kind of the residential-based model.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. My name is Alana Bell. I'm with the Ohio Women's Alliance. We are a reproductive justice organization, and we absolutely see housing as a reproductive justice issue. And also coming from the perspective of intersectionality, when we think about abortion access, we think about all of the things that impact a person before they make the decision to have an abortion, to not have an abortion, to have the ability to parent their child in a world free from violence. And so I'm curious about what intersectionality looks like for you all as folks focused on housing, focused on safe, equitable housing for people, and how these abortion bans, which is going to impact housing, about how these Don't Say Gay bills, which is going to impact housing, particularly for queer youth. What does that look like for you all, and what is your stance on those conversations?
Go ahead, Erica.
Man, y'all ain't come to play today. That just like gut punched me a couple times. So with regard to reproductive health, again, SUMA, being a community health worker, being a survivor of a couple abortions, because I did have, a couple children super early, and then I just wanted to make sure that didn't happen again. We have partnered with Minority Behavioral Health Group as our mental and emotional aspect of wraparound services for the families we provide these services to, not to mention social workers and things in our SUMA, the Health Equity Center, whoever spoke to that. That's the office I work at over by the New Seasons, the senior high rise. We do an amazing job in our little area. We do that, and I live, breathe, I move through these things. We have also partnered with adoption agencies, as far as, if should a mother decide or a family decide not to go through with the pregnancy, we've partnered with certain agencies to make sure, we try to have as smooth a transition as possible for whatever that may look like to the family. Now, again, I keep saying my little section of this. We do a great job. And we do a great job because as if y'all can't tell, I have a big mouth and I try to utilize my platforms to the fullest of my ability. And I try to hold people accountable, but again, that's my section. I can't speak to everybody else's sections. I can't speak to everybody else's jobs, everybody else's responsibilities, but I can do my part of trying to hold people accountable. I believe these bills and these bans, again, this is where our city and county officials are coming into play. Get to know your city officials. Get to know your county officials. Vote for more than just the president elections. Understand that this stuff is impacting us at a far greater level and intergenerational levels than we can ever understand, because we allow ourselves to say yes on this bill. We don't realize that this is going to affect us for generations from now. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand, to learn to see the big picture. And I'm also a member of the Freedom Block, wherever Ray is. He's my best friend person. So again, I try to utilize my platforms. But again, it's one of those things. Understand a vote is not just a vote for the moment. You sitting in these city and county official meetings are not just for the moment. This is for your children's children's children. and understand that we in this for the long haul. This is a long run. So if you winded now, sit down, take a breath, take a breather, eat, get some rest, and then get ready to pivot. So yeah, I know that was a long-winded answer. However, again, and hold your fellow coworkers, your family members, whatever that looks, start holding people accountable. We have these abilities. For those of us African Americans, Black people in the room, our people swung on trees for this. How dare you not vote? How dare you not take the opportunity to check a ballot on the box when people literally swung for you? They died for you to have this ability. This is not just us. We come in standing on the shoulders of many that came before us. So understand, how dare you not? How dare you not?
Thank you.
State legislative as well. Yes, thank you.
Definitely.
I also want to add on what Erica said is not only you have to vote, also hold these board members accountable because they're also investing in the community as well. There's so many different projects of these nonprofits that are in the area that are investing in housing, that are investing in the community. However, they don't know what to truly invest in. There are funds that are just sitting there that is not being invested in. When it comes to intersectionality, we need to look at the accessibility to those opportunities, to those resources. We need to make sure that all the people are getting these resources because a lot of people are getting looked over. Because perhaps it could be mental health, perhaps it could just be how they're showing up in the world. But that has nothing to do with their access to opportunity or their access to resources. So we have to look, yes, at the politicians, but also these board members, because here in Akron, we have so many. We're like overloaded with so many nonprofits that say that they help the community, that say that they've been investing, yet like Erica said, people have their sides of town. There has to be some sort of meeting ground to where everyone who is doing the work meet at a table. We have it at the table. That's a thing here in Akron. So we have these conversations to create true strategies that is truly sustainable, that we can be more sustainable and not reactionary. We have a lot of issues that are truly reactionary, but we need to create legacy. We need to create sustainability for efforts that we won't continue to pay for studies to tell us that something is wrong. Because the money that's going towards these studies could go towards housing, can go towards the community to create that healthy community that we truly strive for.
Thank you.
Tamika, can
Jeff?
I answer just,
Yep.
I was going to add to we keep talking about access, and there's just a thought that continues to come through as we talk about different things related to that word access. And I think your question really helps me to kind of crystallize this thought that I've been having, which is, as much as we define what we want as access on the front end, what access really is about is whether people can get to that thing. And so part of that getting to that, whatever it is whether they're willing to accept that and whether they're feeling respected within that confines. So I think the LGBTQ example that you raised up is an important one, because we can say that things are open to XYZ individuals that have certain characteristics, criteria, whatever you want to define that as. But if that individual's not ready to accept that, if they're not feeling comfortable in that relationship, in that arrangement, they're not going to go forward in any of that. And I think that that's really important as we talk about access to all of these community resources, including housing.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Tamika, and thanks to the panel for being here this morning. My name is Jeff Wilhite. I direct a program called Family Promise. We get homeless families with children back into sustainable housing. We don't define the family, but one of the things that we have noticed in all the years we've been doing it, and it has frustrated us to no end, Doctor, you hit it on the head when you said access, and Dee, when you said trauma. Those are the two key things that are driving us forward. We've built a program that will get folks into home ownership. Until and unless folks own a piece of the American dream, all the counseling, all of the support, all of those things just won't get them to where they need to be. Being able to hold on to a piece of property, some terra firma that's yours, builds generational wealth for our families. And it addresses the trauma that goes with it, because mental health as well as physical health, is we see it every single day with our families. But I wanted to ask the panel, if any of you in your areas of responsibility, are you doing anything along that line for home ownership? And if not, how can we as a community come together? We've already got a good group of folks working with us on this project, but it's going to take a village to make the village owned by the people who live in the village.
I'm going to start to let you guys think about some things, and I'm not bragging, but I did go on vacation, and I went to Jamaica, and they are in a third world country. They are considered a third world country, right? So I was talking to this lady, and she said, you know, she's renting right now, but she's saving up her money so that she can get a piece of land. Because I was talking, you know, we talk about the houses, and that's just the way the houses are. And I was like, well, you know, some of the houses didn't look any different than Cleveland or Akron, right? But she said what they do is they save up money to get land. Because I was also talking about the fact that wasn't a lot of homeless people. Didn't see a lot of people sleeping on the street. Because they actually buy their land and build 4 walls. And then they save up more money to build 4 more walls. And she said, so the houses that you see that are big is because those families, they congregate together and they've saved up their money and they've built houses together. So that's what you see. That's not the Europeans or the Americans coming over and building. That's us. That's our homes. We've just saved up our money to build those homes. So I say that to say that maybe we could take a little bit of, you know, note from other people, other countries that don't take things for granted as much as we do, and really work together, because they do. They work together as a community to build things up. So go ahead. I think, Dee, I don't know if you have.
Oh, yes, I have many things to say. I will say that we first need to empower our people with the idea of home ownership. I have dealt with some folks who feel as though home ownership is the farthest thing in their lifetime. So just us at the Freedom Block, we have leadership trainings every second Saturday of the month where we equipped our leaders with tools of understanding what they have access to and help them dream bigger than what they actively been living. Because a lot of people, they don't have that idea, so we assist them in helping them understand what they have access to. I continue to say access because there is a lot of people who don't believe that they have access to the resources that many of you all spoke about or that are in this room. There are many people who feel as though that they do not qualify for that. And I could just speak on behalf of just me and my coworkers that it's just been a true issue for one of my coworkers just finding a house because of her housing subsidy. The housing quality was an issue. So it's just helping people understand educating them on the programs and how they're truly allotted that dream to own a house, and then giving them that education about financing a house, because a lot of the folks that I've been working with are low income or on subsidies. Owning a house is not anything that they even try to aspire to. They're just truly trying to have a safe place to live. So to just dial it back a little, I would just truly empower the people to help them understand that this is not your be-all, end-all. You can elevate and you can be empowered to one day own a house. But it truly starts with empowering the person to be empowered to even educate themselves on becoming a homeowner.
Thank you. Dr. Davidson?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for the challenge. I think is quite frank with what you're saying. What do we do in our specific areas to improve home ownership and promote it? Honestly, I'm not doing a whole lot. I being like a children's hospital. This is not a conversation that I've convinced my colleagues is an important one to have in the newborn 2-month, 4-month, 6-month visit. It's not on the list of things to talk about. There's a whole lot to that reason for that, but I care about it. Obviously, I'm here. And in some ways, I'm kind of responsible for some of the challenges that go along with home ownership. If I have a child that lives in a home that's exposed to lead, that saved up, that bought a house that they can afford, and now they're up against a challenge of like the quality of that environment. And specifically, I'm calling it out because now their child has an elevated lead. We have to address that. Do we have access to the right grant that is structured in a way that it can actually support their finances? That's often a challenge. So when we have families that do own their own home, that are identified in just by the wrong zip code, honestly, it no problem of the parent themselves. Now they have to deal with this problem. So I've called that out and made that an issue, and that's part of home ownership, I guess you could say. But I worry about that as the issue of lead causing mobility. We want to actually look at that, and actually in the lead literature, nobody's actually looked at a ton of that question. Do we incidentally make people move when we don't really want them to? But on the flip end, sometimes I'm trying to get people to work with their landlord and improving their property and making that a safe environment. And, you know, by the time they move into that actual, better space, they're ready to move on. When we looked at our kids that have elevated leads, within the 2 years that we studied lead levels and houses that are at high rates within our own community, we mapped it and looked at exactly which streets have those problems. Like 3/4 of that population was moving within that study period. I think about North Hill, primarily a big area that has multi-racial, multicultural groups within it that are all exposed to lead. That community at the time between 2012 to 2014, in the streets that we were talking about, had like 6 tenant-owned properties within that environment. This is a problem of not owning a home. So what I try to do is educate families that, around the issue of lead, is when you're buying a home, you need to ask for that home inspection related to lead. It's an added cost. Why is it an added cost? We can talk about that. If anybody has any ideas to make it not added, great. But even right now, as we are in the post-pandemic, lower accessible, again, we don't have as many housing units to even buy. There's this, people who want to buy homes are being pushed out by investors in lots of different places that aren't even any of our neighbors or friends. A lot of people are just foregoing an inspection altogether. So from my perspective, I'm trying to educate families that around the issue of lead, of what they need to look at, whether they're looking to rent a home or whether they're looking to own a home. From my perspective, as a leader of things, the issue of lead in this community, I would love for it to be a standard that tenants are asking for, that owners are demanding. I need to know what the history of lead is in this home. I need to know what you've done to this home so that I can raise my kids in a healthy, safe environment.
Before we move on, I just want to add, sorry, Tamika, I know I had to hurry up.
I'm looking at this guy over here, has told me to stop.
Oh, that's a hard stop. That was a red card.
That was a red. I have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna
and
make
then
this.
Beth wants to ask a question.
Got you, Beth. Real quick, Jeff, we do have a partnership with your organization. I have referred many a family to your program. You are much appreciated for the service that you provide. Amen and thank you. We have to hold these out-of-state homeowners accountable.
Yes.
We are also partnered with 211, the Financial Empowerment Center, and a number of our moms go through classes to buy homes, and along with renting their homes. We provide all types of education based, again, for the women we provide services to. But again, outside of us, I tell everybody that got 2 ears. Who else is doing that? So yes, man, with the red card, you got it.
Thank you, Beth. Real quick.
Okay, so my name is Beth Field. I am the CEO and Director of Programming of the Big Love Network. We are an environmental health equity organization in the city of Akron. So I stare at health disparity maps all day, every single day, down to the block level. It's not a coincidence that those maps are pretty much the same, with a little historical switcheroo because of Route 59, of what redlining districting maps of the whole 1939 map of this city looks like. That map was helped to be made by city officials that were appointed whenever we had a Klansman as mayor in 1925. This is a 100-year race problem in this country that is killing people. That is killing people. But neighborhood organizations such as my own, such as Freedom Block, can't get funding to ask poor people that have generationally been in this situation about what they see as next steps, let alone the people in these neighborhoods actually getting funding for those next steps. So I want to know, my question's for the room. You got some discretionary funds? You got a multi-million-dollar nonprofit that you sit on a board with? Can you please give some of these neighborhood organizations some money so we can do the real work? Thank you.
Okay, on that note, Beth has literally dropped the mic. And so I'm going to say that we're going to take a breather and go and eat and hear from Dr. Matthew Desmond. Thank you all for attending this session. Hey, all right, I ain't mad at you. I ain't mad at you.
Thank you.